I want to congratulate one of your course members and Facebook group members, Stephanie. We won't say any last names. I'm sure she'll know who she is because Stephanie in that Facebook group today just posted that she has 6 months sober from alcohol. I've been following her journey since the very beginning, actually. Since the very beginning when she was raw. She was one of those people that's like just a classic stereotypical success story from your course. And this isn't like this sales promotion that we intended to do here.
I don't mind it at all, man. You can keep going.
Yeah, congratulations, Stephanie. You're doing so awesome. You're just a model of what you can do when you start taking supplements targeted for alcohol recovery in your physiology, biochemistry, and when you also build the rest of your hierarchy treatment plan with the bio, psycho, social, environmental, spiritual.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Thank you for joining us today on Elevation Recovery. This is episode 207. My name's Matt Finch. And again, I'm here with Chris Scott. I guess this will just be a continuation of our last chat where we were talking about vitamin D, new research, how it can exacerbate opioid addiction and how it can make people more prone to opioid addiction. Then we talked about things like how you became really addicted to alcohol at the worst phase when you were indoors all the time working, which is when I finally became addicted to opioids after 8 years of recreational use. Then in upstate New York, where there was hardly any sun a lot of the year, we got addicted. Then we started to talk about a little bit about magnesium, omega-3s. And this seems to be one of the most common topics, Chris, especially in the Total Alcohol Recovery 2.0 course that you have created. And I think you have more than 450 people in the little private group now. That's getting big.
Group, yeah, I think we've had close to 2,000 people in the course, but that's over the last couple of years. And Facebook's not for everyone, but we've got a great group in the Facebook group now. It's I don't recall when I started that, but it's always weird when you start something new and there's like 10 people in there, and you're grateful for the 10 people that are in there, but it's like, we want a community, and now it feels like we have an actual community, which is really nice.
You have an actual community, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. I want to congratulate one of your course members and Facebook group members, Stephanie. We won't say any last names. I'm sure she'll know who she is because Stephanie in that Facebook group today just posted that she has 6 months sober from alcohol. I've been following her journey since the very beginning, actually. Since the very beginning when she was raw. She was one of those people that's like just a classic stereotypical success story from your course. And, this isn't like this sales promotion that we intended to do here. I'm just really excited to see
I don't mind it at all, man. You can keep going.
I'm sure you don't mind it. Yeah, congratulations, Stephanie. You're doing so awesome. You're just a model of what you can do when you start taking supplements targeted for alcohol recovery in your physiology, biochemistry, and when you also build the rest of your hierarchy treatment plan with the bio, psycho, social, environmental, spiritual. She lives somewhere around here, in Southern California, and I see her posting pictures of beach walks and beautiful places. So it's summertime officially now. Welcome to summer, everybody. What are you going to do to make this summer better than any other summer ever?
Yeah, well, Stephanie's a champ, and it's actually hard for me to keep up with everything that goes on in there, which is, I read everything that happens, but I'm not particularly social media savvy. I'm still trying to figure out Instagram. I'm doing a little better than before, not quite firing on all cylinders yet, but it's just the amount of sincerity and authenticity that people bring to that group is amazing. And you hear people's struggles, or someone will, say, look, I just joined 3 days ago. I feel like crap. I don't even know where to start. What do I do? And all of a sudden there's 18 comments, and they're all incorporating something that I wouldn't have thought of, and I respond, me and Coach Tana try to respond to everyone inside the course discussion forums, but it's in that Facebook group, it's everyone else. It's more of a peer-to-peer type situation. And there's just amazing insights from people. And we have some prolific writers and journalists. So anyway, I guess I didn't intend this to be a sales pitch anyway, but I have some, every now and then I try to screenshot something and blur out the names just to kind of celebrate them on my Instagram without, they know who they are. But obviously we keep everyone's anonymity take it very seriously, keep their information private. But I'm trying to do more of like showing what's actually going on in these types of groups, because I think the support component is a really big part of this piece of this puzzle. And that's something I took for granted. I had a unique perspective when I recovered. In early recovery, I kind of relied on my best friends who had always been my best friends. And I was really fortunate that they supported me in transcending alcohol the same way that they had supported me in life and been my drinking buddies in college. And that's something that's almost taboo. And I remember when I got to detox, we had our first very stern, solemn, depressing sit-down group meeting, and the chairs were all in a circle, and there were like 25 people, so it felt odd. Everyone's kind of trying not to make eye contact with everyone else. No one's feeling good. And we had she was not my favorite counselor at this place, a bit jaded perhaps, and had a rabid candy habit, would throw candy at people, which I guess she thought was nice, but was just perpetuating their cravings on a biochemical level. But I remember her saying something about having to break up essentially with your friends and have new sober friends. And, and what you thought was fun before is not going to be fun. Now you're going to have sober fun. And all this, I was on the verge of vomiting in my chair, and I raised my hand and I said, I have really good friends. I think they'll support me. And she said, "You've been here 3 days. You don't know what the hell you're talking about." So that was the early phase of my introduction to this rehab place. I was like, huh. And, I kind of by default, I can be my own worst critic. So most of the time, I think if someone calls me out and it's very unexpected, I will totally try to put my ego aside and examine my assumptions to see if I'm missing something obvious. But in that case, the question of whether my 3 or 4 best friends who have always been my 3 or 4 best friends will continue being my best friends. Of course, she was right in that I did have drinking buddies that I'd already dispensed with. I didn't need help with that. But for her to so quickly dismiss the people who were so important in my life and say I was going to have new sober friends was appalling. And that gave me a negative knee-jerk reaction to a lot of the stuff that came after that. I think, well, fortunately, I suspect that in terms of the digital recovery revolution, that type of counselor is the last of or maybe not the last, but hopefully one of the last of a dying breed. There seems to be a lot more openness, and there seems to be an embracing of different methods. And I don't think it's that radical to say, even in the context of an AA meeting, that your best friends are still your best friends. But apparently it was for her. But I know there are a lot of people who have struggled to identify their sources of support. For me, they were the same sources of support I'd always had. And I just had to be articulate and patient with them while I articulated to them the nature of my condition. I didn't, even in the early phases, I didn't want to say disease. I probably said that a few times, but I never felt right about it. And ultimately, I ended up rejecting the disease theory of addiction. I think disorder makes a little bit more of a sense. Neural pathway makes more sense than that. Neural pathway sustained by biochemical imbalances is the best way I can say it, but it's too wordy, so I stick with disorder now. But all of these people who were close to me throughout college, some even through high school, and then throughout the early part of my career when I started really messing up and becoming really dependent on alcohol, it's like we all went on this adventure together to figure out, what is this thing that is called alcoholism, that's called addiction? How do you get past it? And is it possible to transcend it and build a new, fresh identity while retaining the best aspects of your former self and your former life, including those friendships? And the answer I found was yes, it is possible.
you brought up some really interesting things, and also funny that some of the things I was even thinking about this morning when I was imagining how this podcast could go. We seem to always be in sync, or almost always in sync. And it was actually the part of your awesome little discussion right there where you're talking about your counselor. And so a lot of the addiction counselors, the addiction therapists, typically people at mainstream outpatient rehabs, medication-assisted treatment outpatient facilities, and inpatient facilities too, lots of the mainstream ones. There tends to be this, and I've been around this stuff for ages. I know so many people in this industry, and I've heard from them too. It's prevalent, widespread. There's this giant tendency for probably the vast majority of these addiction professionals, typically the counselors or even the licensed therapists working in mainstream treatment, to look at people with a substance use disorder, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or they're taking a combination of both. And there's this tendency to stigmatize them, even though they should be addiction professionals, and generalize this overgeneralization, these big, huge ironclad rules. It's very black and white. You're going to need to ditch all your friends that you drink with. You shouldn't be in a relationship with anyone for at least the first year of sobriety. You got to go to AA meetings every day for the next 90 days, work a strong program, find a sponsor and listen, do what they tell you to do. Don't even question them. Just take suggestions, all this. And so that works really well for some people. Typically, it works well for obligers. We've talked about the 4 tendencies on here before. Obligers is a type of tendency that typically they have an easy time. This is an innate trait. People that are obligers typically have a very easy time doing what others tell them, whether it's their boss's expectations of them, their spouse's expectations, their kids, or even their counselor. If somebody says, "Yeah, I want you to do this," or "Could you please do this?" Obligers are usually the first to go, "Yeah, I can do that," and they can get it done. They have a much harder time doing things on their own expectations for themselves. Typically, they need high accountability for big goals like that. You and I are both more like questioning rebels. We're both questioners that tip to rebel, or you might be a rebel that tips to questioner. You're I think more rebellious than I am. Although I used to be quite rebellious.
I believe, yeah.
So as questioners, I went to AA, and I'm like you did too, and we didn't just oblige. Oh, I'm supposed to do it this way? Okay. An obliger is going to oblige. There's nothing wrong with that. There's pros and cons of all 4 of these tendencies. Questioners, we don't do what other people expect of us, and we don't do what we expect of ourselves, our internal goals and then external expectations, unless we go through the questioning process in our minds or on paper. Does this make sense? Is this the right team? What are the benefits going to be for me? What are the benefits going to be for these people? There's a lot more of a questioning process. And so it's not just, so we question a lot of stuff. When we're going to take a new supplement, if it's a new, trying AA, then we're trying other recovery methods. We're learning from Tony Robbins and other people. We question things a lot. So that's, there's pros and cons to that. Some of the cons is we can question so much that sometimes we won't make a decision on anything. Or, for me, it used to just lead to neuroticism mixed with a biochemically deficient state. So what I like to encourage people is, doesn't matter what a counselor says or an AA sponsor or anything, just taking advice from people without doing at least a little bit of research, you know what that can do? That can land you taking daily medications without the doctor giving you information that this can lead to tolerance and dependence within 3 or 4 weeks. And then if you stop cold turkey, you're going to be hooked and go through withdrawal syndrome. So when people don't ask these types of questions, maybe their sponsor says, "Okay, I want you to do this, this, and that." They might be meaning very well, but perhaps it's like a horrible strategy for the person. And when people don't question things at least a little bit, it can make it hard. So, but that's prevalent all over the entire nation. we see these addiction professionals that are the old school type. They got sober in AA or NA. They think that's the method that everyone else needs. They go to mainstream treatment, they get certified or licensed, and they're pushing the dogma and the ideology that they were indoctrinated to, that thankfully worked really well for them, or at least I should hope so if they're recommending it. And then meanwhile, we got these other therapists and counselors that are on the fringe that are far outnumbered, that actually look at people like an individual, not an addict or an alcoholic archetype that has a permanent spiritual disease that's incurable, but you got to go to these meetings and give your life to God, blah, 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 blah. So thankfully, there's people and recovery coaches all over the place now where they realize that, that's the old stuff, that's the old rules, the old norm. Before we had all these new cool strategies and biochemical restoration, so many rad things. So yeah, I'll shut up now. That was going forever. This is some good yerba mate.
That was epic. I've got some green tea here. I've got some Mountain Valley sparkling water from Whole Foods, which I like. I love that stuff. Yeah, I like drinking out of glass bottles, especially after, who was it? It was Joe Rogan had on a expert on phthalates and all of the other horrible toxic chemicals that we're absorbing from plastic that is putting the human species at risk of extinction. So rather than go that route, I've decided to drink primarily. I like the Topo Chicos also because they're in glass. It tastes better out of glass too. Anyway, that was a little diversion. But you had sent me a really interesting article this morning from ABC News, Why Honeybees May Be Key to Understanding Alcohol Addiction. And so it says, worker bees experience withdrawal symptoms when alcohol was removed from food. Now, there's a lot that's interesting here. But basically what they did was they gave these honeybees alcohol-spiked food, which was a sucrose solution with about 1% alcohol in it. They gave it for a long period of time. It doesn't say how long, but they did have withdrawal when they were cut off. However, they said that the bees who were the forager bees, who would typically leave the hive and go out and forage, I don't know, they would presumably come across rotting, potentially fermenting fruit or alcohol, that they had a different reaction, essentially. So they had more resistance to the detrimental effects of the alcohol. And so I don't know, it doesn't say if they were less resistant to alcohol addiction, but that brought up an interesting topic that I think I first read about in Joan Matthews Larson's 7 Weeks to Sobriety a long time ago, where she talked about the genetic underpinnings of a biochemical predisposition. And the idea that alcohol, and I don't know if this is true of other drugs, but it would be interesting to see, that alcohol is basically engaged in a process of natural selection with humans. And in regions where alcohol has been more prevalent, and we've only had hard liquor for several hundred years, but there are regions of the Mediterranean, for example, that have been drinking wine for a long time, you see lower rates of alcohol addiction. One of the reasons for that is that there's been just this slow and steady exposure over hundreds or thousands of years to this alcohol. And all of a sudden now, for people in Scotland or in Poland or even in Russia, where there hasn't been such habitual use for such a long time, all of a sudden it's picking people out of the gene pool who may have this predisposition. And of course, we see it with Native Americans. We see it with other groups who have had zero exposure historically until all of a sudden they did, and it was a disaster. So I found that the fact that there's a parallel with those honeybees was something I wanted to bring up, because I don't believe in determinism. I just want to preface that. And that's something I've been thinking about lately. Predisposition is not predestination. It's not destiny. However, it is something to keep in mind. If you have a predisposition for something, it means that you're more easily or more likely in a mass probability sense to fall into whatever that thing is, whether it's diabetes or whether it's, there are certain things maybe you can't control. I have a friend who had found out that they have a gene for breast cancer that's makes it extremely likely they're going to get it. That's a predisposition. And in that case, the question then becomes, well, do I get a double mastectomy and try to mitigate that risk? With things like alcohol addiction or addiction to anything in which there is a behavioral component, you have a little bit more freedom. But you have way more freedom when you're A, aware of the predisposition, and B, you can think of alternatives to achieving whatever the implied benefits of using the substance would be. So, in my case, I often wonder, I'm adopted, and I was exposed to alcohol in the womb, which accounts for my hearing loss, which is actually pretty significant, even though my brain has apparently figured out a way to compensate for the hearing loss by processing words a little differently. But people who walk up behind me or peripherally and say my name, I will often give them the illusion that I'm blowing them off purposefully, which might actually be a useful thing depending on what kind of person they are. But most of the time it makes me feel bad. I'm sure I've blown off people who I didn't mean to blow off. But I have that. I've known about the hearing loss. I didn't know until I got studied by all these experts and took all these tests and tried to figure out everything about myself during my alcohol-free journey and addiction transcendence journey, that this was caused by alcohol exposure. It was like, whoa. And I had a moment where I thought, what if all of this was just destiny? And that was there was an inclination to believe that it was just destiny. I might have even said at one point that I think it is destiny for me to have struggled with alcohol addiction. But I now think that anything in which there is a behavioral component, you do have an element of choice. But the more knowledge you have, the more power you have. So I do think that if I had known in college that I was A, adopted, that B, my biological parents had in all likelihood struggled with alcohol, and that I'd been exposed to alcohol in the womb, that could have helped me modulate my behavior a bit differently than I did. There's no way to know for sure because I can't go back in time, and this is just a hypothesis. But it can be useful to know about this predisposition. So my point in bringing that up is that if someone knows, if they're not adopted and their both parents and their grandfather died of alcohol addiction or cirrhosis or whatever, it's not a curse. It means you have very valuable information. And for whatever, if you already have an alcohol addiction or an addiction to opioids or whatever, it can be very useful to figure out what perceived benefits lie within that behavior and what are some other ways that you can achieve it. And last but not least, I know this is another long rant, and I'm going to bring up one of our favorite podcasters again, Joe Rogan. He had a guest on recently who wrote a book about the evolution of alcohol through society. Now, this guy doesn't, I think I should preface, this is important, he doesn't focus on alcohol addiction. He's not looking at this from the same lens through which you or I would look at. And this is probably not a book I would have wanted to read in early recovery, because it wouldn't have given me the range of evidence that I needed to leave alcohol behind. It would have just made me sit and think about Romans drinking wine. However, he did bring up the fact that, with alcohol, you see for some people these deactivation of the PFC or prefrontal cortex. But he brought up the fact that you can also achieve that same state through intense exercise. There are other things that you can do. There are some cultures that evolved without alcohol, like the Polynesians evolved with kava. They don't drink alcohol, or maybe they do now, but they didn't then. I think still a lot of them don't. But kava is something that I discovered after I quit drinking. And I went to some kava bars in Chicago, and when I was in there, I was thinking, why the hell did I ever drink? Like, this is better. I'm clear. I don't feel toxified. I'm not going to have a hangover. It's not going to ruin my sleep. I would actually sleep better somehow after drinking kava, and it would make me more sociable. So it was, I think, deactivating my prefrontal cortex, which, maybe that's useful for some people who have a lot in their minds to temporarily act like a 4-year-old again. Sure. But the point is, it's up to you how you achieve that. You don't need to join in the most popular, even evolutionarily most popular mechanism that's evolved for that purpose. It's up to you. You have the choice to figure out what it is you want to do. And if there are benefits to doing something for which you have a predisposition to having a problem with, that's information for you. That should be fuel for you to figure out, what things can I try? What adventure can I go on that helps me make that an exhausted resource that pales in comparison to something I have not yet tried?
Woo! That was epic.
It
A
was more
lot to.
meandering than I wanted it to be, but you know what? I had a very vigorous Muay Thai style workout earlier, and I'm still on a high from it, which sometimes has the effect of making me less articulate but more creative, which might be the exercise deactivating my prefrontal cortex a bit.
I love prefrontal cortex, not deactivation for myself, but prefrontal cortex toning down, just mellowing a little. I used to joke around a lot in my 20s. You might have heard the song, I forget who it's by. 24 hours ago, I want to be sedated. Da, 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 da. I don't remember the rest of the lyrics. That was one of my theme songs back in the day. Another phrase I used to say to my buddies was when I'd be at work, my coworker friends, we'd be working and I'd be all, I got the skills that buy the pills because I want to be sedated. Just all this laughing and jargon. I didn't know about, GABA deficiencies. I didn't know about endorphin deficiencies. I didn't know about sensory processing sensitivity, aka highly sensitive people. 1 in 5 humans have this innate trait. Didn't know I had that. So yeah, you were talking earlier about the more information and knowledge you have, the better, because that's like so many more choices you have, so many more options. You can do things so much better from more choices. When you're going to try to overcome a good challenge, a hard challenge, do people want less choices or more choices? Well, I guess it depends on the choices, but hopefully lots of choices and lots of really good choices. Back then, I didn't know about anything else other than at first marijuana and alcohol. Then it went into exploring through different pills and stuff. But tell you what, by the end of my 20s into my early 30s, I had probably tried 15 or more different drugs. And now, if you look around my home, there's more than 15, way more than 15 different supplements. And I've got 3 different types of bath salt mixes with like Dead Sea salt and magnesium salt and botanical oils, and 3 different types of those, a ton of different Chinese tonic herbs, a few different types of animal organ supplements, and then a bunch of different foods and elixirs. I sent you a picture the other day of my Ganoderma, so reishi, the mushroom of immortality, Ganoderma hot chocolate. So I'm drinking this reishi hot cocoa last night. Barely any sugar in it. Just the most delicious, creamy tasting hot cocoa ever. It's got a big old fat dose of this Chinese tonic herb that's an adaptogen. It's good for my respiration. Got this essential oils diffuser going here. So what I'm getting at with all this stuff is, so I'm 41, I'll be 42 next month. Thank God that better late than never, I have found myself the best types of foods and drinks for myself, the best types of supplements, and even, mood lights and smelling things like incense, essential oil, scented candles. I've got the most awesome girlfriend I couldn't even make someone up like this if I was writing out the perfect girl for me. It's just everything about it's just great. This lovely little bird. And this is all the culmination of more than 9 years now of going on this self-development and then professional development journey. It's never ending. It's constant and never ending improvement. And I'm so glad that so many people are catching on to this. That's one of the main things that you and I wanted to do with this podcast, was so many addiction podcasts and blogs and YouTube channels. A lot of them are just spouting the same stuff, traditional stuff, which is great. People need that information. It works great for a lot of people. But I was just hungry, as were you, to provide people with this self-development, personal, professional, biopsychosocial, environmental, spiritual optimization for recovery. It's really fun, we get to, and by doing that, we can talk about almost anything on here. Addiction, if you're talking about addiction in the very mainstream way, you're kind of limited in all the different things you can talk about. The way we talk about it, addiction is like a self-induced brain disorder or a lifestyle-induced, totally reversible chronic brain disorder. something like that, or what you were saying. But then coming at it from that approach, if it's a lifestyle disorder like type 2 diabetes, that's completely reversible. Or maybe it's the type 2 diabetes, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the one that you can totally reverse. It's based on your lifestyle and sedentary life and eating way too much sugar and calories in general. But addiction, that is a lifestyle disorder. Were you and I more prone to it than a lot of other people? Probably. Does that mean we had to get addicted? I don't think so. What if we lived in a place where there was no drugs or alcohol for 1,000 miles? But yeah, so we're in one of the updated courses you're going to do in the future. You're going to have in this app we're talking about. You're going to have all these custom assessments for people, so they can get so dialed into their specific strengths, challenges, missing links, and help them to articulate and visualize a path forward that not only makes really a lot of sense to them, but is just so tailor suited for their transformation journey.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about how to best define addiction. I think eventually we'll probably dive into semantics and try to figure all this stuff out. But for now, a neural pathway reinforced by repetition, emotional intensity, social influences, and biochemical imbalances would be the best way that I can say what this thing is. And I don't think that anything in that implies that you need to change your identity of yourself as a result of trying to unpack whatever the hell that is. And that, you can, or take on an identity as someone who's powerless. I like to say that you forge an identity that retains the best aspects of who you've always been, plus whatever new things you learn on your journey. That's true for anyone who's going through personal growth in the first place. I would argue that personal growth and self-improvement, in addition to fulfillment, which involves helping others, is necessary in order to pave over neural pathways that you want to extinguish or make go extinct. And that's part of our mission here, is to help inspire people to do that and to help show them how to do it. So I know you have a coaching call. Coach Matt Finch will be calling someone or receiving a phone call in the next few minutes. So we'll keep this one short, but we'll have maybe even a part 3, but we'll be recording again soon.